Okay. All right. So we're up and running. We are now in chapter 8, which means chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. We're almost done. We're just plowing our way through Pesach. We'll definitely be done in time for Pesach. Once again, we're going to be dealing with some issues that have to do with who's involved with your Pesach party. Remember, we've talked many times that the Pesach has to be one that you are connected to. And this, we're going to start off with dealing with some issues of assumptions. That is to say, if you don't actually publicly declare, I'm with this group, I'm with that group, there are certain people that we can make assumptions about what they're with, who they're with. And that's where we're going to start. So, Pesachim, chapter 8, Mishnah 1. Do I get a volunteer to read while I do commentary? Yeah.
A wife, when she is in her husband's home, and her husband slaughtered on her behalf, and her father slaughtered on her behalf, she must eat of her husband. All
right. So again, we're going by assumptions here. So you have Mrs. Shapiro, right? And Mr. Shapiro has the Passover all set up and does the offering for his household. And Mr. Cohen, her father, does the same for his household.
He's assuming
that she's going to come home for the holidays. But the Mishnah is telling us you don't get to make assumptions because she is going to be automatically registered with her husband's, right? Because she is by default part of his household. As we're going to see, that default can be modified, but just if everything else is equal and no one's talked to anyone, and communication would help. But if no one's talked to anyone, then by default, she is under her husband's roof for the Passover offering. That's the assumption. That's where she has to eat.
Yeah.
However, part 2.
Second, yeah. If she went to spend the first festival in her father's home, and her father slaughtered on her behalf, and her husband slaughtered on her behalf, she may eat wherever she pleases.
All right. So
maybe she can eat both of them.
Well, she can only fulfill the mitzvah once. But the idea here is, if she's already gone to her father's household, then she has physically made a statement that she's part of that group.
Yeah.
But she is still,
with the husband,
by default, part of the husband's group.
Yeah.
So she now basically has a choice. So by default, if no one's talking, she's automatically with the husband. If she goes and she's at her father's, she has now...
even if she goes with her husband?
Well, if she was with her husband, then where's he?
Both of them, both of them are...
They both can join with her father's household for the Seder, no problem.
Yeah.
But that has to be explicit. The husband has to declare where he's going to have his Pesach and register to be part of that group. Because when her father slaughters, he has to have his son-in-law in mind for being part of this group. Exactly. Yeah. So that's what ends up happening. So she gets a choice. In a similar way, number 3.
Number 3, an orphan on whose behalf his guardian slaughtered may eat wherever he pleases.
All right. So it's important to remember orphans in the ancient world were not handled the way orphans are handled today. Right nowadays, we have a formal legal adoption where the orphan becomes the child of the guardian. That didn't happen in the ancient world because of the way property rights were administered. You were not adopted because that would mess up the inheritance of the land. You know, because if you were from one tribe and you were adopted by another family, then if their tribe's land goes to you, then where does your father's land go to? It gets really messy. So you had a guardian instead.
That's pretty smart.
Or you would have multiple guardians that would look after you, that would administer your estate, take care of you until you were of age, and then you would be on your own.
Yeah.
And so that was the way it was handled. But come Passover, let's say you've got 2-3 guardians that are looking after your affairs and everything. Who do you have to eat with? Any of them.
Any of them, yeah.
Right? And you don't officially belong exclusively to any one of them, Therefore, you can eat with either of them, because any of them would have had you in mind when they were doing their sacrifice as being part of their group.
Yeah.
And so you can go to any house you like.
Yeah.
The exact opposite is number 4.
A slave of 2 partners may not eat of either.
All right. So again, think of slavery more as like indentured servitude with severe limits on your personal freedoms, because you can have a partnership over a slave. So you've got Mr. Cohen and Mr. Shapiro. They each are controlling part of this person's life, or the amount of time and labor they have to give, right? And therefore, he is sort of connected to both of them, but neither one of them is assumed to be slaughtering the Passover with him in mind. And therefore, unless there's something that's said, he can't eat from either one of them, right? You can't assume they slaughtered for me. The orphan, you can assume everybody was slaughtering with him in mind. The slave can assume no one was slaughtering with him in mind. And
So you can't eat.
Exactly. Now, a slave without a partner, I mean, that is to say, a slave that's just a slave of one household, then automatically, yes, he is assumed to be part of that household. He would eat from that house. So
the slaves were Jewish?
Some, yes.
Some of them?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the whole section we just read in Mishpatim was dealing with Eved Ivri, with a Hebrew slave. Again, slavery was not designed to be chattel slavery, like we had in the United States.
Yeah, that was bad.
The American experience was much, much worse, both legally and in reality, than what the biblical forms were. That's not to say that the biblical slavery was a picnic. It wasn't good, but it wasn't the same as what we had in this country. So yes, a slave, he's still a Jew. He has severe limits on what he can do because he is in this very horrible position of owing his labor to another person and therefore giving up much freedom. But he is still obligated for as many mitzvot as he can. And in this particular case, he would definitely be eating the Pesach.
So what happened to the non-Jew slaves?
Non-Jewish slaves were circumcised when they were brought into the household, and so they would have eaten as well. Non-Jews are allowed to eat if they're circumcised from the Pesach.
Even if they didn't convert?
Yes.
Wow.
It's a form of, well, I mean, it doesn't happen anymore. It hasn't happened for 2,000 years.
I know.
But I mean, it was a form of a foot in both worlds. So you weren't officially Jewish, but you also were not officially 100% not connected with the community. And so you were connected enough to do this, but you weren't connected enough to actually be Jewish. So it was a very blended experience.
Now, what happened to not orphans, but children on the street?
Well, those are orphans. I mean, presumably unless you mean they've been abandoned.
Like in Romania, there's so many children on the street. There's 200,000 children on the street every year.
Right, that's pretty horrible. So there's when the Torah and the rabbis talk about orphan, they mean a child whose parents are dead.
I was an orphan. My parents were alive.
I know. I was going to say what you're describing. Well, but I'm saying this is a technical term in rabbinics. Right. In English, we use the word orphan for anybody who doesn't have an official guardian.
Right.
Right, and that's a different category legally than what's being described here. Right. What's being described here is for a child whose parents are deceased. The idea that there would be parents who didn't take care of their children it's not that it didn't exist, but it just would have been stunning to them, because what are you going to do with your kid? Are you going to leave him in the street? Everybody knows he's your kid, so they're going to bring him home. I mean, the community would force you to take care of your own children. There wasn't such an anonymous society where you could just leave the child and have them disappear. So it wasn't that it didn't happen; it just wasn't a standard occurrence, unlike our modern society where it happens far too much. In fact, I would say the majority of orphans nowadays, in America at least, are people whose parents, for whatever reason, have decided to give them up for adoption, as opposed to who are deceased.
Yeah, because like the guy who visited me from Romania, who brought me to America,
Mhm.
he finally told me that my mom would come and visit me in the orphanage almost every day. Almost every day, that she could not take care of me.
Right.
She was just too poor.
Right. And the idea, of course, in Judaism is that you would want to help a family to make sure that wasn't the case, that a family would be able to stay together.
So, like, let's say I knew I was Jewish
Mhm.
as a homeless child, and my mom could not take me in for Pesach either, right? So would I still allowed to go other places?
You would have to be arranged ahead of time, but I mean, the community should, God forbid the community would allow a child to be living on the streets.
Happens every day in Africa.
I know, but the ideal within the Jewish community is that is not something that we would let happen. Whether or not it does, I'm not privy to, but it's certainly not what our ancestors imagined as being a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
All right, part 5, which is kind of part B of the next of that section.
He who is half slave and half free may not eat of his masters.
All right, so how do you be half a slave and half free?
I know.
So you got two partners, right? And they both own the slave.
Mm-hmm.
One partner says, I free the slave. He frees his half of the slave. So the slave still owes work and labor to the one guy, but the rest of it is free for himself. And this has a lot of ramifications for many other things. But here it basically means even though you're half free and only owned by this guy by one half or one portion or whatever, you still can't assume that even though he's the only owner of you, that he would make the Pesach on your behalf. Instead, he would be assuming that you're mostly free or partly free, that you'd be making your own Pesach arrangements. And therefore, you can't eat from his table, you would have to make your own arrangements. But he would make his own arrangements.
That's kind of mean, though.
Well, it's not a question of mean, because it's not that the master couldn't invite him to the table. It's the assumption.
Oh.
Right? We're talking about legal assumptions here,
Okay.
not about what's the right thing to do. The right thing to do, of course, is to make sure the guy has a place for Passover and all of that. The assumption, however, is you can't assume that the master did that. It has to be explicit.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
It says that he cannot eat from his masters. So
Mm-hmm.
that means he cannot eat from the guy that still owns him as a slave.
Right.
But what about the other guy?
Oh, no problem.
He can eat with that guy.
Yeah, no problem, because he's not a master anymore.
He's not a master.
Right. So if the guy, but it would have to be again by registering by invitation.
Yeah, communication. Yeah.
Communication.
You would have to ask. I want to be in your Seder.
Or he would make his own Seder.
Yeah.
He's partly a free man now. He can make his own.
His own. Yeah.
So
okay.
All of that could.
It's not very clear here.
Well, no. I mean, there's a reason why we have the Talmud, and that's because the Mishnah is not always clear. Okay, Mishnah 2.
Mishnah 2.
More assumptions, more if only you communicated kind of problems, right? But these kind of problems can happen.
I had an issue yesterday at work.
Communication helps.
Absolute lack of communication.
Yep. All right. Sarah?
Mishnah 2. Okay. One who says to his slave, go out and slaughter the Pesach on my behalf. If he slaughtered a kid,
that's a baby goat.
Yeah, he may eat it. If he slaughtered a lamb, he may eat it. If he slaughtered a kid and a lamb, he eats the first one.
All right. So what's the problem here? Pesach is a type of sacrifice, but it's not a type of animal, right? Because you can do a Pesach from a goat, and you can do a Pesach from a sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the master just says to him, give me a Pesach, well, if he brings back a sheep, did he do it? If he brings back a goat, did he do it?
No.
Yes. The Mishnah says, yeah.
Both of them. Yeah.
If the master didn't say which one, then either one is fine. And if he brings back both, then whichever one got slaughtered first, that's the one that's it.
Yeah.
And the second one is just extra. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Very logical.
Yeah.
Very logical. But notice, I mean, the opposite is ruled out. You can't say, but if you didn't say which animal, then now that animal doesn't count. No, it's if you didn't say, as long as it's a fine offering, that's an okay offering. It's good enough if the master didn't say. However, part 2.
If he forgot what his master told him, how should he act?
All right. You get all the way to Jerusalem. Wait, was I supposed to get a sheep or a goat? I know he told me to get one of them.
Where's my cell phone? Oh, wait.
Yeah, where's the cell phone? Let me just text him, right? No, what am I supposed to do? Okay, so this is what he should say.
Okay. He should slaughter a lamb and a kid and declare, if my master told me to slaughter a kid, the kid is his, and the lamb is mine. If my master told me to slaughter a lamb, the lamb is his, and the kid is mine.
Okay,
Logical.
it's very logical. So what he basically says is, all right, I'm slaughtering these conditionally, and whichever one was the one that he wanted, that'll be
That's
his.
his.
And the one that's not his will be mine, right? That way I'm covered. And when I get home and the master says, you brought me the lamb, it's like, yes, this is your lamb. And if he gets home and he says, you brought me the goat, that's right, this is the goat. And the lamb is mine. Yeah, he's covered no matter what.
But
Unless
the master gets mad at him for bringing both.
for doing, everyone wants extra meat. It's Passover. You want to have a big meal.
Big party.
But there's still one more possible problem. Part 3.
If his master also forgot.
What if he gets back and he's got the goat and he's got the sheep and the master says, wait, which one was mine? So the slave forgot, the master forgot, and he got 2 dead animals. But the only way the animals were going to work, remember when he made the declaration, was whichever one the master had said was his is his. Well, if the master doesn't remember which is his, then neither are his.
Yeah, both of them are burning.
Well, and so that's what we have to do.
Both animals go to the place of burning, but they, the master and the slave, are exempt from sacrificing the second Pesach.
So remember, a month later we have the
Second
Pesach makeup day, and that's for people who are traveling and couldn't get back, or people who were ritually impure. We're going to talk about that in a bit. They don't have to do that for this, because when the slaughter was taking place and the blood was being sprinkled on the altar, at that point, the master still knew, at least that's the assumption, which was his. And therefore, when the sacrifice took place, it was valid. It's just by the time it got home
You forgot.
that it's not valid. And so therefore, you have to burn it because you don't know which is which, but you don't have to do a makeup one. Again, logical.
Yeah.
Okay. These ones, these early ones aren't too bad.
No, yeah.
All right, Mishnah 3.
Mishnah 3. If a man says to his children,
And you're going to love this one.
behold, I'm going to slaughter the Pesach on behalf of whichever of you goes up first to Jerusalem.
Okay, well, let's make sure we understand what he's being promised here. So this is how to get your kids to be competitive. All right.
Uh-oh.
All right, boys. I'm going to do the Pesach sacrifice, later today. And whichever one of you gets to Jerusalem first, I will do it in his honor, in the sense that it becomes his Pesach that he then shares with the family. Now, everybody's still eating. No one's being cut out of the dinner party. But it's a big honor to be the person whose sacrifice is being shared with everyone else. So that's what he's basically saying. I'm gonna make you the head of the group, whoever gets to Jerusalem first. So run. It's a way to show excitement and enthusiasm for doing the mitzvah. Motivation. Exactly. So,
Okay.
as soon
So as soon as the first has put his head and the greater part of his body into Jerusalem, he has acquired his portion. And he acquires it on behalf of his brothers with him.
All right, so now we know what the finish line is, right? As soon as you get into the city, cross that line.
It's like the Super Bowl. You cross the line.
You break the field. Yeah, except in the Super Bowl, any part going across the field. In this, it's got to be the head and the majority of the body. Exactly. So that's a touchdown. Yay!
Touchdown,
the Pesach is yours. Okay.
Yeah.
Just don't spike it, right?
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
No.
All right. Part 2.
Part 2. One may always register for it as long as there is as much as an olive's worth for each one registered.
All right. So remember we talked about before, you have to eat from the Pesach, not total, but from the Pesach, at least an olive's worth of the meat of that. And you can keep adding more and more people to the registry for your Pesach as long as there's enough for everyone.
For everyone.
Right?
Zayit for everyone.
Zayit, exactly. If it's less than that, then yeah, you have a problem because now you can't do the mitzvah.
Yeah.
All right. But part 3, we're going to have to be deregistering.
Okay. They may register and withdraw their hands from it until it has been slaughtered.
Right. So right up until the moment where the knife goes, you can back out and say, no, actually, I'm going to go to my neighbor, right, and register with him instead. But once it's been slaughtered,
that's it.
You're stuck. That's yours, and that's where your mitzvah is going to happen. Rabbi Shimon has a slightly different view.
Rabbi Shimon says, until the blood is sprinkled.
Right. So he extends it a bit more.
Yeah.
Right. Remember, we're not talking like hours in between here.
A few minutes.
Maybe. It depends how crowded it is. Right. Until the blood makes it up to the altar, you could still technically cancel your participation in that Pesach. Not too much of a difference. Good?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Mishnah 4.
Don't worry, when we hit Mishnah 5, it gets hard.
Okay, Mishnah 4. If one registers others with him to share in his portion, the members of the company are permitted to give him his portion, and he eats his and they eat theirs.
All right. Subletting. Right. He's subletting. Right. Yeah. So he has gotten his portion from the other guys in the group. That's to say, he registered with a group, and he's going to get, a pound for his portion. And then he goes, well, I don't need a whole pound. I can have 10 of the guys join me, and we can each get 1/10 of a pound. No problem.
Still mitzvah.
It still seems like a mitzvah, but what they say is basically, now, if you do that, yes, you still cover the mitzvah, but go eat with your group. You've basically made your own group. It's official. You are covered. You have done the mitzvah, but you can't pretend like you and your sub-leasees are part of the main group that you joined. You've basically branched off, and you're your own business now. So take your portion, and you go eat over there, and we'll take the rest of it, and we'll go eat over here, and you divide yours with your guys, and we'll divide the rest among us. Make sense? Makes sense. Nothing like good logical Mishnahs. And Mishnah 5 is, well, it is logical. It actually is beautifully logical, but there's a lot of background information. All right. So we've said many, many times, if you're ritually impure, you're not eating.
Yeah.
Okay? But what if your ritual purity is just about ready to expire? What if you're on the borderline? And so we're going to have to look at a couple different types of ritual impurity. And I'll go ahead and explain them as we go through, because if I give too much at the beginning, then it's just, well, you don't see the implications. So let's go ahead and do Mishnah 1, and we'll deal with the third word.
If a zav.
All right. So what's a zav?
Zav is an impure person. He had maybe a discharge of semen or.
Well, it's not right. Not necessarily just semen, but this is a zav is someone who the discharge is abnormal. That is to say, it wasn't during intimacy with his wife. There's something happening here that is not normally happening. And
bladder infection.
right, and you've got leakage. And it's not a pretty term, right? It's not a pretty thing. And you are rendered ritually impure for a while, right? And that while is for 7 days, right? If you see 2 instances, 1, you're not so bad.
Sexual transmitted disease.
Well, it's considered to be its own unique thing. It doesn't matter what the origin is. Okay, so if you have a Zav, what happens?
Okay. If a Zav saw 2 instances of discharge, they slaughter the Pesach on his behalf on his 7th day.
Okay, so hold on a second. Maybe we need a timeline. I'm beginning to think. All right, so this is the 14th, right? That's the day we're doing the slaughtering. And the 15th at nighttime, I'm going to draw a little picture of a moon and stars, right? That's the Seder. So that's our target. We want to be able to eat at Passover time. So what happens if 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I have my second Zav appearance, right? My second discharge. So I got to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. And at the end of the 7th day, I'm okay. I'm ritually pure. And that's what they're saying is okay. If your period ends on the 14th, yes, you can't, which is the 7th day, you can't go to the temple to do the sacrifice, but someone else can do the sacrifice on your behalf, and you can eat from it at the night of the 15th. You're okay. So that's the last moment. So 7 days out, if you get this issue, in both sense of the words, then you're just going to squeak by. If the issue happens here, then sorry, you're going to come back in a month, and we'll do it then. But right now, you're not going to make it. Part 2.
Part 2. If he saw 3 instances of discharge, they slaughter on behalf on his 8th day.
All right, let's change color. If you have a Zav by 3, there's a slightly different procedure for the Zav. You count 7 days, and then on the 8th day, you offer a sacrifice. Not Passover sacrifice, a sacrifice because of the Zav, or being a Zav. Well, that wouldn't work if you had the 3rd emission on the same day as the guy next to you had it on his 2nd emission. For 7 days you could eat in the evening, but here, yeah, I'm technically ritually okay, but I haven't done my sacrifice yet, so no. So this would have to be moved back -1 an additional days. If the 8th day was here, then he's okay. All right, over here, it's not going to work. Yeah. So if you're a double Zav, then 7 days out from Passover, you're okay. If you're a triple Zav, 8 days out from Passover, you're okay. Any less for either of them, not going to happen. Not going to happen. You're just going to miss Passover and come back in a month. All right. Number 3.
If a woman observes a day for a day, they slaughter on her behalf on her 2nd day. What's day for a day?
Okay. So, like I said, this is where it gets a little more complicated.
Women on their menstrual?
No, exactly not on the menstrual. That's the whole point. A woman who's going through the cycle of Nida, the menstrual cycle, that's already accounted for by being a Nida, and we know what's happening there, and that's fine, and we don't have to wait and see. It's just automatic. The phrase day for a day has to do with if you have this discharge that is for just 1 day, but not the next day, right? So you see it once, and then that's it, right? So technically, you can go to the mikvah, and you're fine. You don't have to wait an additional amount of time. And so that's why the idea here is on the 2nd day, you're okay, right? Because I need another color. Go to black. All right. This is our, we're going to call it day squared or day by day or day to day, right? If she's here and here, that's okay, right? Because this is when it happens. And then the second day is there and she can go to the mikveh. Boom. By the evening, she's okay. Right? Make sense?
Makes sense.
Makes sense. Okay.
And it's not the regular menstrual. It's
Well, that's the point. It's
Yeah.
definitely not the
Not-
menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle, we already know the regular routine to deal with,
Yeah.
right? It's the 7 days, the 7 days after it began.
Yeah.
It's a little more complicated in the modern world, but we don't have the sacrifices to worry about, because in the modern world, the way that Nida is observed is actually a combination of Nida and being a Zava. So that's why it's much, much longer in the modern world for the separation between husband and wife. But that's a whole nother class. Maybe someday we'll study Nida, but right now, that's all you need to know. Okay, part 4.
4. If she saw a discharge on 2 days, they slaughter on behalf on the 3rd day.
Okay, so if she has a double, I'm sorry, that should have been Zava 1, right? So if she is Zava 2, right? Then we got 1, 2, 3. She's okay, right? Because there is an extra day of waiting for that period. However, if you are a full-blown Zava, that is to say, it has been the consecutive 3 consecutive days of sign of discharge, then we get to part 5.
And as for a Zava, they slaughter on behalf on the 8th day.
Right. So if it's this, then she goes right back into the 3-day model of the Zav. And so she's back here now. And boom, if it's 8, then it's okay. Otherwise, sorry, you're not gonna be able to share this sacrifice.
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't too bad, right?
No.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But like, okay, now my question is, I might be off topic in the sense of
That's okay.
understanding. Because this is mainly about men more than it is about women.
How do you figure what?
Oh, okay. Well, about the Zav, discharge. So
The Zav is the man. The Zava is a woman, right?
Okay. So what happens if a man discharges every day because of his health issues?
Then he is in difficulty
Yeah.
with regards to ritual purity. But that difficulty has repercussions in biblical and rabbinic law. At the moment, it doesn't.
To right now.
To right now, it doesn't have the same ramifications. But yes, in the ancient world, if someone had a particular problem that was causing this issue constantly, then that would create a problem for them to participate in the rituals of sacrifice. Other rituals, no problem. You can still do many other things. But this, yes, that would be a problem if it was just always happening.
I'm a caregiver, so this is why.
Well, then, yeah, let's hope that no one has to suffer like that. Okay. You know what I just noticed? Somehow when I was putting this together, I think I might have missed a Mishnah.
I know Zava. This one question has nothing to do with the sexual organ, but what if you get discharged from the eyes?
See your eye doctor.
No, in Judaism.
Yeah, no, it's just tears or other things that can secrete. It doesn't have any ritual significance.
Okay.
Just go see your doctor.
Okay. That's all.
Okay, chapter 8, Mishnah 6.
Okay. As to an onen,
Mm-hmm.
and one who is removing a heap of stones, and likewise one whom they promise to take out of prison, and a sick or an old person who can eat as much as an olive, they slaughter on their behalf.
Okay, so we got special categories, but I wanted to make sure we understood that they all can have a sacrifice slaughtered for them. Now, it wouldn't be slaughtered exclusively for them, but it would be slaughtered for them in a group, and that would be okay. Now, why are these all special cases? So if you are an onen, right, that is someone who had a close relative die, but if they are on that day, right before the burial, they technically don't eat from sacred food on that day. But it's okay in this case because by the following evening, right, oh, I erased it, our 15th, it's a new day. Even though I know, yes, we tend to think of the evening as being part of the day, the evening in Jewish law is the start of a new day. So for an onen, I know he's going to be okay tonight. He'll be able to eat this tonight, so I can slaughter it and he can join me and it's okay. Removing a heap of stones. Be thankful you live in the modern world. Although if you were watching the news recently from Taiwan, maybe you'll sympathize a bit more. There's been an earthquake, and there's a pile of stones. And I think there might be somebody underneath that, right? So I'm digging. While I'm digging, I don't know if I have already come into contact with a grave, with a body, right? While I'm digging, you can sacrifice on my behalf. And if I get to the bottom of the pile and there's no bodies, I can eat. I can still eat from the Passover sacrifice. If I get to the bottom of the piles and there's a body, I can't eat from the sacrifice. But that's okay, because while you were sacrificing it, I didn't know and you didn't know, and it's also going to be eaten by other people, so it's not a wasted sacrifice. So while nobody knows, it's okay for you to go ahead and sacrifice with me in mind, just in case there's no body.
But were you able to still allow to have a Pesach meal?
I mean, can I eat other food?
Like Passover, were you able to have a Passover meal?
I can, for them, I mean, the most important thing was the sacrifice. But if you mean, can you eat matzah or can you eat other things, then yes, you can eat, you can still have dinner.
Oh, okay.
But you can't have anything that is from the altar.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what they're trying to talk about. Similarly, if you're in prison and they tell you, guess what? You're going to get out of prison on the 14th, right? An early release, right? Because I guess they don't do Passover in the prison. So you're going to get out of prison on the 14th. Good luck for you. You tell your family, hey, I'm going to get out. And they say, okay, then that means we'll expect you to be at our Seder. When we do the sacrifice, you will be in our mind. And that's great. And then what may happen? Kidding, you're not getting out of prison yet.
Oh man, yeah.
It's not necessarily a joke, or just bureaucracy takes time, you know.
Judge doesn't want you.
And you get out the next day. Okay. So because there is a doubt that you might not make it, you might think you shouldn't do the sacrifice on that person's behalf. But they say here, because there is a chance you will make it, and because it's not being only for that person, then it's okay. Make sense? Also, if somebody is sick or if somebody is old, maybe they'll be able to eat it. Maybe they'll be too sick to eat it. I don't know. Should I keep them in mind or should I not keep them in mind? Keep them in mind. And if they're able to eat, they can eat. And that's wonderful. And if they can't, well, it happens. Okay. However, like I said, to explain it in part 2 a bit more.
Yet, in the case of all these, they may not slaughter for them alone, lest they bring the Pesach to disqualification.
Right. As I already sort of hinted, if this only works if they're part of a group. If it's just one guy working with the pile of stones and the rest of us watching, we can't make a sacrifice just for him because he may already be ritually impure. If it's just one old person, I can't do the sacrifice just for him because he may not be able to eat it. So, but if he's part of a group, then it's okay. Right.
So the rule is that the person has to be part of the group.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The person has to be part of a group, and there's some good musar there. There's some good ethical advice that these people who are in mourning, who are busy trying to save a body, who are sick or who are old, you should want them to be part of your group.
Yeah,
And
they are part of the community.
Exactly, and it's better for them to be part of the group, even if they end up not being able to eat. Something happens and it turns out there was a body, they are too sick, or whatever. It's still better for them to be part of the group.
So what about a doctor who deals with a very well ill
Exactly.
person?
They never know if the person's going to die, and if they die, then yes, they are technically disqualified. But before that happens, the person who's doing the sacrifice should still keep them in mind and say, I hope that everything will go well and that you're not going to have anybody die while you're there, and that you'll be able to eat from the sacrifice. And if somebody does die, part 3 tells us,
therefore, if a disqualification occurs to them, they are exempt from keeping the second Pesach, except for the one who was removing the heap, because he was unclean from the beginning.
All right. Got to get the logic straight here. If you were sick and someone offered the sacrifice on your behalf, hoping that you'd be able to eat an olive's worth, and come evening time, there's just no way you can eat anything. You're unconscious. You're just
Sick.
Gone. Right? You're not dead, but just really, really sick. A month later, do you have to offer another sacrifice? And the Mishnah says no, because when it was offered, when they did the slaughtering and the blood was on the altar, you were still potentially able to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not that you couldn't have that sacrifice. You were in a maybe, and maybe is good enough, right? In this case, maybe is okay. It's a tie, and ties you win, unless you're the person going through the heap of stones. And why is the heap of stones different? Because as soon as you stepped into that pile to start removing the stones, looking for the bodies, even though you didn't know it, you either were or were not disqualified, because there either was or there wasn't a body under there. The body isn't a maybe. Your knowledge is a maybe, but the body is real. And so as soon as you come into contact with the pile, you're now ritually impure, which means the sacrifice that they were offering with you as part of the group could not have been for you, even though you didn't know it yet. So therefore, next month, you can come and bring a second offering, because you were ritually impure, you just didn't know it. Make sense?
More or less.
More or less. I mean, it does have a very good logical system to it, which is all of these people don't have to worry about it except for this guy, because he already was, he just didn't know it. The others were maybes, and they stayed maybes and then turned into a no, but the no or the maybe was the main thing they were while the sacrifice was taking place. And maybe is okay, definitely not but ignorant. That's not good enough. That you got to come back next month. Good. Now, what I've just noticed flipping through this,
yeah, we miss one.
is we're missing Mishnah 7.
7, yeah.
So tell you what we'll do. We can go ahead and do Mishnah 8. It's okay, because it's still talking about a similar theme. And next week I'll make sure to do Mishnah 7, because we're doing so well, and we've got time. So I want to go ahead and see if we can do Mishnah 8, and I'll just add Mishnah 7 before we begin chapter 9 next week.
Or could you cover a little bit of Mishnah 7 to get to Mishnah 8 right now, so we can understand what we're getting into?
Always better to read it for yourself. I want you to study it as a group. I mean, I could pull out my copy on my phone and read it to you, but it's not the same. All right, so Mishnah 8.
And Onen immersed in the mikvah and eats his Pesach in the evening, but not other sacred food.
Okay, so remember we talked about the onan, the person who's had the close relative die that day. And we said that they are considered unable to eat sacred food until they have immersed in the mikvah and the next day. But that's d'Rabbanan, right? The additional delay for eating sacred food is a d'Rabbanan prohibition. And so the rabbi said, yes, but the mitzvah of Pesach is d'oraita, it's a Torah commandment. And therefore, for this, he goes ahead and eats the Pesach after having been in the mikveh for that day. Make sense? So he gets there's a special interplay between when you have rabbinic instructions that can sometimes bump against Torah commandments, then you have to be flexible. Part 2.
one who hears about his dead for the first time, and one who gathers the bones of his dead relative, immerses and eats sacred food.
Okay, so you are just hearing about it for the first time, and usually this is after the person has died a while ago, right? So you were on a boat, and back then no radio, no messages, no phones, right? You come into the dock, you've been gone from home for a month, 2 months, and they say, Dad died a month ago, right? So you go into a very abbreviated period of Avelut, of mourning. You don't do the full Shiva period and all of that. Exactly. But for the moment, you are considered an onen. But as they point out here, if you are in that category, they go ahead and do the mikvah, and you can go ahead and eat. Now, the gathering the bones, do you guys know the custom of an unveiling ceremony?
Unveiling, yeah, the marriage.
No. That's bedekin. You're thinking. Now this is
stone
for the headstone for a grave, right? So nowadays in many American communities, about a year or so after the burial, the matzeva, the headstone, will be formally unveiled and shown as the marker that will stay there for forever. And there's a little ceremony that we do at the graveside for that. In the ancient world, the ritual was a little different, because if you were lucky, what you would do is you would have there'd be like a cave, and you would put the body, that's a body, on a little ledge in the cave, and a year later you'd come back and the body would be bones, right? The body would just rot there in the cave, and you would take the bones and you put them into a little box, right? And that was where they stayed forever.
That's the burial?
That's the burial. And then the sledge would now be clear, and next person goes on the ledge.
Oh wait, I thought you'd get shrouded.
Yeah, you'd be wrapped in something, but you'd fall apart over a year just lying there.
Well, it's not gonna. How can you get into this building? Probably it's gonna smell.
Oh yeah.
You gotta have your mask.
I mean, the smell of death and disease and sewage was everywhere in the ancient world. Yeah,
wasn't much.
We are so lucky. You don't even begin to know. Right? So if you've ever been to Eretz Israel and you go up to a place in the north called Beit She'arim, it's the perfect, best example of this. It's a whole wall of caves with these beautiful sculpted entranceways. And you go inside, and there's little rooms for different families and people with these ledges and little boxes. And this is where the bodies were put in, and then the bones were gathered, and then they were put into the box, which is called an ossuary, which is the fancy Latin, or is it Greek, saying bone box. And that's where they were stored.
What are the boxes made of?
Stone
boxes? Yeah.
They're made out of stone.
Beit She'arim, you say?
Yeah.
I'm going to Israel next week, so.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's just in the north.
Thursday, not this one. 1 week more.
It's like right on the border to the Galil in the north.
In the north?
Yeah.
Oh, that's my sister. I'll force her to take me.
Well, it's really very interesting, because it's the place where Yehuda Hanasi, the man who wrote the Mishnah, was buried. And so it's really a very important spot for Kever Avot, for the tombs of our ancestors. But it's not that well known, which is kind of strange. So yeah, if you can go, it is Beit She'arim.
So is when you put it in the stone, there's no like how can I say it? Something that desensitizes the smell of the.
Well, by the time it's bone, there's no smell.
Oh,
bones don't smell. It's the flesh that smells.
Yeah.
But like I see in like CIA and Law and Order, when they lift up the casket 5 years later from the grave, it smells.
That's because our modern caskets are designed to slow down the decay process. The ancient world, nothing was there to stop it. It was absolutely designed. I mean, to allow the body to return, to rot and to decay. That was what we were supposed to do.
This gives me a little bit of a problem because you're supposed to be buried in the ground.
Yeah,
You are buried in the ground. This is a mountain.
Oh, it's a mountain? Okay.
Yeah, it's a cave.
So it's a cave in the mountain.
Exactly.
It's still, I have a problem with this.
I thought you're supposed to be buried in the soil.
Yeah, in the soil.
You have to be buried in the ground. This is underground.
But where's the soil?
On top of you, yeah.
You are in a cave. How much more dirt do you want?
You're not. You're okay. You're under
Yes.
the cave. You're under the dirt, but you're not in the dirt.
Right? The dirt isn't touching your skin correctly.
It's supposed to, though.
Says who?
Isn't your body supposed to touch the dirt because your body is decaying and it eases up the body for it?
So why would we have a shroud? Right. So I know that the custom in this country is definitely to bury someone directly underneath the dirt.
But it's not in, but you have dirt over you or around you. But
Correct. And unless you're putting the body naked in the ground, there's always going to be some distance between you and the earth, whether it be a layer of a shroud, whether it be the layer of a wooden casket, or anything else. The idea is that the body would be allowed to decay naturally and do so underground. And that was the custom of the sages in the ancient world. And like I said, Yehuda HaNasi was buried in such a cave. It's good enough for him. It's who am I to argue? It's
How about our fathers and mothers? They were buried in the Me'arat HaMachpelah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So the same way,
right. Well, we don't get to go look in Machpelah because we don't go into the actual tomb. But the presumption is yes, that it was a tomb underground where Abraham buried Sarah and then himself and so on. Yeah. Exactly. And of course, we see the same idea, the same style of burial described by other ancient writers. We also see the same burial description in the Christian Bible when they bury Jesus in a cave. That was standard practice. Right? That wasn't a surprise. That's what you do. So it fits the style of burial.
So how could it smell if you roll the stone over the cave?
Well, it's not going to smell as much as if it were completely open, and of course, having some form of door. And when if you go to Beit She'arim, you'll see the doors were actually stone slabs, not rolling stones. That's a band. Not a round stone, but like a stone block. That also keeps the animals out. Yeah. Because you don't really want
animals to eat the flesh.
Raccoons going in and raccoons are North America. You don't want animals going in and eating your loved ones. So they would definitely still block the entrance. That will block some of the smell, but I don't know how much you've ever been around a dead animal, but they smell. they smell.
You were right, because I took my daughters one time to a kibbutz near the border of Lebanon. And they couldn't stand the smell of all these animals.
Right. The living animals.
Yeah, they're living animals. Yeah. So yes, you're right. They lived in a very smelly environment.
Yes.
And they were used to it.
Yeah, mostly. It doesn't mean that they enjoyed it. There's a reason bad smells smell bad. It's because it's our body's way of warning us that there may be something there we shouldn't be doing. When you smell manure and it's like, that's our body's way of telling you, don't eat it. Right? Bad smells are a protection. So bad smells aren't always bad, is what I mean. They are sometimes helpful, but yes, we are very protected from bad smells in the modern world. At least most of us are. All right, let's just finish up part 3, and then we'll call it a night.
A convert who converts on the eve of Pesach. A. Bet Shammai says he immerses and eats his Pesach in the evening.
All right, so Beit Shammai says, no problem. You go to the mikveh, just like you would normally expect, and by the evening, it's a new day, and you're okay. Beit Hillel
saying
is more stringent.
Anyone who separates from the foreskin is like one who separates from the grave.
So Beit Hillel was of the opinion that when you convert, you are initially still affected by a presumption of ritual impurity from a corpse.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, you've been living in a community that didn't care in the ancient world where the bodies were kept so much. Mm-hmm. And so the odds are you have come into contact, you've been in the room, you've been walking over the graves, you haven't been concerned with this. And therefore, when you convert, it still lingers longer. And that means you're going to need more time to finish the final step of the purification process, just like anyone else who comes into contact with the dead, before you can then eat things that are sacred. You're Jewish, but you have to wait for the end of that ritual period rather than just going the next night. So that's why Beit Hillel says, just wait a little bit longer.
I thought
convert earlier than Pesach. Don't do it the night before.
The night before, yeah. I thought Shammai is usually the one who's more stringent than Hillel.
Indeed, on an average basis, you're absolutely right. That Shammai is usually stricter, and Hillel is usually more lenient. In this case, not. In this case, not.
All right, Rabbi. I'm still stuck on the body.
Okay.
Okay, so why do it's kind of an off subject, but not at the same time.
Okay.
So why does Judaism accept and allow what is that word?
I don't know.
I mean, Christianity just accepted it too now, but
I need give me a description.
Oh my God, I have this memory issue.
Well, tell me what the word is like.
It's in a little box when a person dies and they burn the body.
When they burn.
You mean cremation?
Cremation.
Well, I mean, many Christian groups have had cremation for a long time. That's not a new thing for Christian groups or Buddhist or other religions. And Judaism doesn't accept cremation. We don't believe that it is the right way to treat a body.
The Reform does.
Even in the Reform discourages it. If you were to ask, a Reform rabbi, should I get an in-ground burial or should I be cremated? The rabbi is going to say, get an in-ground burial. Mm-hmm. What we've had to deal with in Judaism in the last 5, 10, 15 years are the number of people who don't ask. And they go ahead and get a cremation. And then you have their children come to the rabbi with the urn, with the ashes, saying, what do I do? Dad had this done. I couldn't stop my brothers and sisters. What do I do with the ashes? And what we do is, yes, we will give those ashes a burial, despite the fact that the person who did it, for whatever reason, didn't do a proper burial. So we will try to give as much of a proper burial after the fact. But no, we don't accept the idea. We don't consider it the right way to treat the deceased. It's considered to be a horrible dishonor and desecration of the body which carried the soul. But we've been forced to deal with the after effect because a lot of people don't ask us anymore. They just do. And we want to do at least what we can. When someone comes to us saying, what do I do? My mom made this happen. Now what do I do? But it is a real problem. And part of that is because in-ground burial is getting so expensive. Yeah.
And no room, especially in a small place like in Israel.
Yeah, well, in Israel, it's there definitely is no room. In America, we got plenty of room. It really shouldn't be an issue. But unfortunately it is. So I say it's too expensive to die, so I'm just going to have to live forever.
So what happens with you and Rabbi Rubin